The first World Cup almost never happened. In 1930, most of Europe refused to go. The journey was too long. Money was short because the world had just fallen into the Great Depression. People said the whole idea was foolish. And yet, that year, 13 teams crossed the world to play in a tournament no one had ever seen before. How did a foolish idea survive? Why did Europe say no? And how did one small country invite the world and convince enough teams to come? That is our story today. Before we begin, here is what you will see. A 0-0 match in Scotland that quietly changed everything. A man who wrote letters that almost no one answered. And a final in a packed stadium that started a tradition the world still follows today. And while we follow this story, we will also learn English. Calm English. Useful English. English you can actually speak. So get comfortable, listen slowly, and repeat with me near the end. This is not only history, this is English practice too. Let's go back to where it all started. The scene moves to a cold afternoon in Scotland, November 30th, 1872. A field in Glasgow. About 4,000 people stand around the pitch, breathing into the cold air. Two teams walk out. England against Scotland. The very first official international football match in history. And what happens? Almost nothing. No goals, no drama. The match ends 0-0. By modern standards, it is a forgettable game, but think about what it really meant. Two nations had agreed to settle something, not with armies, not with politicians, but with 11 players and a ball. The idea was small. The result was enormous. Because after that day, football began to travel. It spread from Britain to the rest of Europe, then across the ocean to South America, then to Africa and Asia. Everywhere it went, people fell in love with it. A game invented by English schoolboys was quietly becoming the game of the whole planet. But there was a problem. All these matches were separate. There was no single great competition, no one stage where every nation could meet. Football was growing fast, but it had no home of its own. A growing game now needed someone with a plan, and that person was waiting in France. In France, there was a man named Jules Rimet. He was not a famous player. He was the president of FIFA, the federation that organized football between nations. And he had one stubborn belief, that football deserved its own world championship. One tournament open to every country, separate from everything else. Picture a quiet office, a desk covered with papers, letters, and a map of the world on the wall. Rimet writes letter after letter to football associations in other countries. He makes phone calls. He travels to meet people in person. And most of them say no. This is the part people forget. Rimet's idea was not welcomed with open arms. It was doubted. Many leaders thought a global tournament was impossible or simply not worth the trouble. But Rimet kept going. He believed the idea was bigger than the doubts around it. Why did he believe so strongly? Because he had already seen something remarkable, and that something had a name: Uruguay. But we will come back to that in a moment. So why was Rimet so sure? Because a small country had already shown the world something it could not explain. Now picture the Olympic Games in Paris, 1924. A small South American nation arrives to play football. Nobody in Europe expects anything from them. They are far from home, unknown, and easy to ignore. Then they start to play. And the crowd goes quiet. They pass quickly, move freely, and play with a rhythm Europe has not expected. The ball moves between them like it belongs to them. By the end, the silent crowd is standing on its feet. That small nation wins the gold medal. 4 years later, in 1928, they win Olympic gold again. That nation was Uruguay. Jules Rimet was watching, and now he was certain. If a tiny country could beat the best of Europe, then football truly belonged to the whole world, not just to a few nations. The time for a real World Cup had come. So in 1928, Rimet stood up at the FIFA Congress and made his proposal. Football needed its own world championship, bigger than the Olympics, belonging only to football. The members voted. The proposal passed. The World Cup was created. Then came the big question. Where would the first one be played? Which country would host the world? The answer was Uruguay again. And there were good reasons. Uruguay were the Olympic champions, the best team on earth. And in 1930, Uruguay was preparing to celebrate 100 years since its first constitution. The country offered to build a brand new stadium and welcome every team that could reach it. So, it was decided. Uruguay was selected as the first host nation. But choosing Uruguay created one enormous problem. Uruguay was far away, across a wide ocean. And for most of Europe, that distance felt impossible. Here is the hard truth. The first World Cup almost failed before it began. Many of Europe's biggest football nations said no. England, Italy, Germany, Spain. They all refused to travel. The journey to South America took about 2 weeks by ship. The Great Depression had just begun. Money was short, and the whole idea still felt like a gamble. For a while, it looked like no European team would come at all. Imagine that, a World Cup with no one from Europe. Then, slowly, 4 nations agreed: France, Belgium, Yugoslavia, and Romania. In Romania, the story goes that the king himself helped choose the players who would make the trip. One by one, the teams said yes. 13 nations in total prepared to cross the world for a tournament that had never existed. On the ship deck, the ocean is wide and gray. Players stand at the railing day after day, the same sea, the same sky. Some are nervous, some are excited. None of them truly knows what is waiting on the other side. And with them travels something bigger than their luggage, the hope that this strange new tournament will be worth the long, uncertain distance. Then, one morning, after 2 weeks at sea, a coastline appears. Montevideo. Land. The end of the journey and the beginning of history. After the long voyage, the dream finally reached the field. July 13, 1930. In Montevideo, the first World Cup begins. That day, a French player named Lucien Laurent receives the ball and strikes a volley into the net. It is the very first goal in World Cup history. He is only 22 years old. He has just made history, and yet today, almost no one remembers his name. Match by match, the tournament grows louder. Flags in the wind, crowds filling the new stadium. And finally, it reaches the last match, the first World Cup final. On one side, Uruguay, the host. On the other, their neighbor and rival, Argentina. A huge crowd packs the Estadio Centenario. The whole country holds its breath. When it is over, Uruguay have won 4-2. The first World Cup champions. The captain lifts the trophy into the air, and the crowd erupts. In that moment, it looks like just one match in one small country on one summer day. But it is so much more. That single final became the seed of a tradition. From Montevideo in 1930, the World Cup grew and grew, until one day it would be watched by people on every continent, all feeling the same thing at the same time. One stubborn idea, rejected by many powerful nations, had become the beginning of something the whole world would share. The World Cup began with doubt, distance, and refusal. But it survived because enough people believed the journey was worth taking.